And the text.
You guys need to sign it.
Not just, right? No, it's just the sprinklers. The sprinklers that spray towards the house. The sprinklers that spray towards the front.
Yeah, they will be.
Did you sign it already?
Just moved here. Actually moved here in April. Just moved into the house in August. You live around here? Oh wow.
It's about 65.
Has it changed?
I used to run the roads. You can run anywhere.
Yeah.
Now you can run over.
Well, I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia. It's like this summer, certainly coming back to heat.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Yeah, I suppose you from
I mean, you want to. I think in some ways it can't get quite as bad. Because all the open space here.
We'll borrow it from the other side of the field. I never paid that.
Yeah.
I kind of like the yeah, I'm more concerned. We haven't had a drought here. Last drought, no. Now I'm trying to use the tape.
That's all the houses.
The next one will be real interesting. Because once you get past the reservoirs, you're not all finished.
Yeah, there's nowhere. Yeah, Atlanta had this. You know, they had the rivers and everything they took. Everybody downstream would suffer. Legal battles with Alabama, South Georgia, saying they have to release so much water.
Whatever's not rehab in California, they use all of it. And then some.
I mean, it's not so size.
It's called wind jam. Back in the it's all coming out.
Oh, really? Oh, Grand, yeah.
It's all wind gap.
I heard you play.
Grand Lake.
Grand Lake, yeah. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, I just assumed there were reservoirs on while we were waiting.
Let me know how, are we okay without a mic? We have one we can use, but can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Well, let me know if that changes as we go along, and we can certainly use that, but I don't want to blast you out either. So thanks so much for being here. You guys really know how to pack a room. This is a great turnout. My name is Darcy White with Clarion Associates. We are part of a land use consulting firm based in Denver. We've been hired by the town of Superior to help them facilitate the process about Northwest Superior. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, and really happy to have such a great turnout from the community. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background, more detail about what we've been asked to do, some of the questions that the town has for you as community members, and some of the influencing factors that we see really shaping the part of Northwest Superior in the future. We're going to talk about some of the things that you might see as community members based on what tools the community has in place currently. And then we do have some specific questions for you. So you've got your polling devices, and we're going to come back to those here in a moment. And we're also just going to have some time for discussion. So bear with us with the big crowd. We'll try to keep things moving as efficiently as possible, but make sure everybody has a chance to kind of get any ideas out that they want to get on the table as well. So we did a similar meeting last night over at the fire station. We had about 35 people or so there. And we kind of structured it that we'd have some room at the end. We'll kind of play this by ear a little bit tonight and see how we do. And you know, our intention was to have a little bit of an open house format at the end, but I think given the number of people, that might be a little tricky. So we may keep you together and just have more time for discussion. So we'll see how that goes and kind of try to get you out of here as efficiently as possible. All right. So in terms of the process, what we have been asked to do at this point, this is potentially a two-step process. So this first step of the process has really been initiated by the Planning Commission. We have several Planning Commission members here in the back who've been helping us with the process. We also have Martin Toth, our Assistant Town Manager, who I think stepped out of the room here in a moment, and Stephen Williams, who also stepped out of the room in a moment. They left us. Who is the town planner, and we've been working closely with them on this process in terms of getting ready for this meeting. Sung Han is with Clarion Associates also. He is going to be taking notes for us in the back, and he's been working with us as well. So really step one is focused on listening. This is really a chance to talk through some of the issues and opportunities for Northwest Superior and get a sense of where the community thinks more direction is needed or not. There's no predetermined outcome of this process at this point. Our charge is really to listen to feedback from the community through a series of meetings, as well as through an online survey which will launch tomorrow, which has all of the same information that we're going to talk about here tonight. Take all of that information, kind of try to synthesize that, take it back to the Planning Commission and work through some of the potential options that they might consider recommending to the town board to move forward. So that's going to be a pretty short process. I'll talk about the timeline here in a moment. But at this point, really it's going to be a case of the Planning Commission providing a recommendation to the town board if there is going to be a step 2 of this process. Initial conversations had thought, potentially there might be an opportunity to do a more detailed planning process for this area, but that's really going to be driven by what we hear from the community through this process. So in terms of why this is being initiated now, really kind of a variety of things, but I think we'll talk about some of the changes that this area has experienced over the last 5 years or so, and you've probably witnessed those as community members and have thoughts on those, but really want to understand the different perspectives in the community about these changes, about the types of changes you might see in the future, and just have a dialogue about what the options might be. Whether your current policies and regulations that the town has in place are appropriate, or if you want to look at some other options. So that's why we're here. And when we talk about Northwest Superior tonight, you'll notice that the boundary is pretty large. It's not just about the marketplace, it's not just about original town, but there's a lot of different components to Northwest Superior. And so we're going to talk in detail about some of each of those places tonight, and also about the area as a whole. So in terms of the timeline, I mentioned this is a pretty quick process. We did our initial work session with Planning Commission just 2 weeks ago, and we are looking to have some initial recommendations back to Planning Commission for their consideration and for discussion in December. So we'll be working on that over the next month or so, with a target of going back to the town board with the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to at that point in terms of what those next steps might look like. So pretty quick turnaround, so you'll have some clarity in the near future about what the town's plans are based on this process. So we're going to start off with just some warm-up questions. I mentioned the polling devices that you have. Does everybody have one at this point? If you don't, please raise your hand, and we've got a whole stash of those handy. I think we got everybody, but most folks. You should also have a comment form, and this really just is kind of a companion to the questions that we're going to be asking. In some cases, we'll ask for, these are all multiple choice, obviously, but in some cases, we may ask you to explain if you answer a certain way, so it's just a way for you to record any specific thoughts that you want to get down while we're talking. So feel free to do that, and we would encourage you to do that. But just to get us started, we've got a couple of warm-up questions. We're not going to call you out if you get this one wrong, but we want to see how everybody's history is here. So these work very, very much like your remote control. It's pretty straightforward. This will also tell us how many folks we've got here tonight. So. All right, so as we get close, I'll just say going once, and then we'll move forward. So, all right. Uh-oh. A lot of people got this one wrong. I don't know what this says about this group, but yeah. So feels like we've been here. Yeah. So, okay, like I said, no judgment on that, but
What's the answer?
So it was 1904, so C. So in terms of a couple more warm-up questions, just to help us understand who's in the room tonight, just want to know which part of Superior do you live in? There is an option if you don't live in Superior, but you're in the county. Can you guys see okay? Okay. Try to see that.
I think we did.
Great. Okay. So it looks like we're sitting on an almost 50% original town, but we've also got pretty strong representation from Coal Creek Crossing. So next question, kind of last background question, is just really what brought you here to the meeting tonight. You can pick more than one answer here. Obviously, different folks may have multiple interests, but just kind of curious who we've got here and what your interests are. Okay, going once. Okay. Lots of residents, lots of property owners, which is what we would expect for this evening meeting. So let's talk a little bit about context. So I mentioned earlier, wanted to give you a little bit of background on some of the influencing factors. And first we'll talk about some of the development activity that we've seen in this area since 2012. We mentioned 2012 primarily because that was the date of the adoption of the last major comprehensive plan for the community. So we'll talk more about what that is in a bit. But that was really kind of the last time you had a process like this to really talk about future growth in your community. So since that time, you've had almost 60 new residential units built in Northwest Superior and about 100,000 square feet of non-residential development. And that's primarily the new storage facility on the northwest side, kind of near that number 1 there. But you've also had other development proposed within this area on the 2nd Avenue properties, kind of in the southeast part of the study area, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit. So different things have happened, some different changes that you've observed. And you've also had a pretty significant change across McCaslin. When we worked on the comprehensive plan, the downtown process was really just getting underway. The infrastructure hadn't been put in. That was still in the planning phases. And so now that's really started to come to life. You've got a lot of activity there in terms of the sports stable, the new medical offices going in, and also some residential units going in there as well. So some pretty big changes, not just within the area, but also directly adjacent to it. There's also been a substantial amount of capital improvement made by the town in this area. And so completion of Founders Park, there's been improvements to Coal Creek to help with some of the flood issues. You've had a number of roadway improvements. The new diverging diamond interchange was not here 5 years ago. A lot of very visible changes in terms of the infrastructure and improvements based on those types of capital investments. You've also seen quite a bit of change on the US 36 corridor, and you probably have blacked out the construction phase of that in your minds now, I would imagine. But for 2 to 3 years, that corridor was really kind of being transformed. You've now got the bus rapid transit station and access to Denver and to Boulder on the Flatiron Flyer, the new dedicated bikeway, as well as enhancements to the actual laneage on that highway. So getting in and out of Superior to other points in the region is much easier today than it was 5 years ago. And then the last thing I'll mention is that based on some of those regional enhancements along the US 36 corridor, the town initiated a study about a year ago, and it's called the TAP report, and that really stands for a Technical Advisory Report, shorthand. And this was something that they worked with the Urban Land Institute to pull together. And so this was basically a short, kind of intensive study of long-term potential for Superior Marketplace. And so
as communities and regions really look at transforming their transportation system, the concept of transit-oriented development comes into play. And what that means is basically if you have a fixed high-frequency transit service like bus rapid transit, in other cases light rail, the areas around those stations become opportunities for this transit-oriented development. It's typically higher density. You have more people who are willing to live in a spot like that where they can access transit and other services, other amenities. And so that's a concept that the town wanted to explore, working with Superior Marketplace businesses and RTD and other stakeholders. And so recommendation coming out of this report was really to look at some near-term opportunities to enhance connections to the marketplace. And so that really focused on pedestrian improvements, bicycle improvements, so wanting to make those businesses more viable in the near term, wayfinding and kind of helping create those connections as well to the emerging downtown area. But the bottom line is coming out of this study is that the panel of experts that was convened to do this study really thought that there was long-term potential for higher intensity transit-oriented development at the marketplace over time. What it doesn't mean is that it would you would start over. It means you would adapt different parts of the center over time to maximize that potential, but likely a lot of the box uses that you have there that are doing really well would probably stay. And so there's a lot of nuances to that, but I think in terms of trying to get the answer of, is this something that would be worth considering, the answer coming out of this report was, yes, it's something you could consider. You would need to be proactive in doing that as the town in terms of planning for that and putting the zoning and entitlements in place to support that, if that's what the community wants to see. This would be very similar to the process that the town undertook with downtown Superior across the way. So that was a 5 to 10 year process of planning and kind of really getting the tools in place to support what's coming out of the ground now. So kind of the same approach is what they were recommending coming out of that process. Mm-hmm.
When you say engage potential development partners, what are development partners?
So that would be if the town wanted to bring in a master developer to redevelop the whole site, they would work with individual businesses. There would be someone who would kind of execute the actual concept over time. And so there's no specific developer at this point. This is just a general statement about that would be necessary to kind of execute a bigger scheme like that if that were to ultimately come out of this.
So you mean development planners and also developers?
You would need to do a more detailed plan for the area, and based on that plan, engage developers in a discussion about, is this a type of project that you might take on? Similar process to what happened with downtown.
And they would all be considered as partners. I don't mean to be mincing words. I'm just trying to get an idea of where that's going and how this is envisioned. So the development partners would be the planners primarily.
So I think at this point we're just acknowledging that there's a lot of partners and stakeholders that would be involved in that conversation. There's no specific plan to execute anything at this point. This is just a concept that's been explored. And part of what we want to talk about tonight is where should we go with that?
Okay.
So we'll come back to that.
So I might be the only one who doesn't get this, but I don't really understand what that means, transit-oriented development.
So the best example that I can kind of give you is kind of what's coming out of the ground in downtown. It's going to be a more walkable environment, so you may have bigger buildings, but they're going to be close to the street. You have very good sidewalk connections to other parts of the community, and it usually has a mix of both residential and non-residential. So you'll see kind of the typical downtown format where you have retail on the ground floor, you might have offices above or residential above. So that's just one concept, but it's going to be more compact. It's going to be higher density than what's there today, which is more auto-oriented. Okay. Yes?
What does improved wayfinding mean?
So really kind of helping people understand what businesses are there today in the marketplace and kind of getting in and out of there off of McCaslin. So kind of making that flow improving the flow in and out of the area. One of the things that we heard from our business focus group this afternoon is just that, wayfinding and kind of people knowing what businesses are there is a challenge for the business owners. And so that was something that kind of came out of conversations they had, is that would really help them, kind of support the businesses that are there today.
Does that mean more signage?
Potentially. And, that's usually how wayfinding is kind of enhanced. But I think the other option that came out of, or suggestion that came out of the study was, kind of revamping some of the landscaping to improve visibility, and there were some other suggestions as well. So, all right, so, yes?
When you say downtown, are you referencing downtown Denver?
No, Superior, across the street. Yeah. So the last kind of background slide here is really just about population and employment trends in the region. And so, generally in this case, we're looking at Boulder County primarily, even though, the surrounding counties are growing as well. I think that the most noteworthy thing here is that the town of Superior itself has not grown as rapidly as other parts of the region. So your population estimate for 2015 was to get to about 15,000 people. As of 2016, you were still shy of 13,000 people. So you haven't had as rapid a growth rate as other parts of the region, but as the areas around you grow, you are going to continue to kind of have some of those pressures as people want to take advantage of some of the shopping you have or other things you have to offer as a community. So it's something to factor in as you think about how you want to position your community going forward. So I want to give you a little bit of background about some of the tools that the town has in place today. So really kind of two layers here. First is the policy level, and this is really just what are the kind of basic statements about what type of community Superior will be in the future that the town uses to guide decision making kind of day to day. So if someone comes in with a new project, the first thing they're going to do is look at the comprehensive plan. They're going to look at the transportation plan, parks plan, all of those things, and see how well aligned it is with those documents that went through a public process and were adopted by the town board. You also have existing zoning regulations, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of these here in a moment, but those are really the more official laws that guide the uses and the intensity of development that happens in different parts of the community. So this is typically referred to as your land use code or your zoning code, and some of you may be familiar with that, others you may not. In this case, you also have a specific planned development district for Superior Marketplace, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you've got these tools in place, and this is really kind of what guides decisions now. When the comprehensive plan was updated, there was a discussion of thinking about the community as a whole. There are very few vacant properties in the town of Superior currently, and so the basis of the plan at the time was that there were 12 opportunity areas, and those were looked at individually, and there were conversations with the community about what the types of uses were, what types of concerns they had about each of these sites when they developed over time. And there's 2 of those 12 that were in Northwest Superior, are in Northwest Superior. We'll talk about these here in a bit, 76th Street properties, as well as the 2nd Avenue property. A couple other notable things about the comprehensive plan policies is that the concept of protecting the character of original Superior was something that came through loud and clear as the comprehensive plan process. And so the policies in that plan do talk about that in terms of that being important to the community. And that plan recommended at the time that the town consider adopting design standards or some other type of tool to help protect the character of original Superior. The plan also acknowledged at the time that there would be long-term potential for the transition of Superior Marketplace with the investments being made on the US 36 corridor. That was a very high-level mention, really just kind of flagging it for future discussion. So that's kind of the framework that you have in place now on the policy end. You've also got the transportation plan, and that really takes the land uses that are proposed in the comprehensive plan and translates that into lane miles, connections, signals, all of those things in terms of the traffic model of what we would need to plan for in terms of improvements to accommodate future growth. And so that's kind of your guide on the transportation end of things that the town uses. The transportation plan also addresses bikeways and trails, and you guys have a great system already, but I think notably, based on the comprehensive plan process, there was a lot of discussion at that time about using the bikes and the trails to really knit together the different parts of the community. So there was a sense then, and to some extent may still be a sense that Northwest Superior is pretty separate from Rock Creek and other parts. People who live in Rock Creek may not be as familiar with Northwest Superior and vice versa. But these are really kind of the connecting tissue to kind of knit the community together. So there's been a lot of focus on that in terms of improvements that the town has been making to try to create those connections. And the other piece to this is really to give people an alternative to driving to different parts of the community. So this is a very active community. You've got great access to open space, so a lot of interest in bikes and trails, and that's really where a lot of the direction for that comes from. So talking a little bit about the underlying zoning regulations, so we'll break this down into a few parts. So the first is to note that kind of these lighter yellow areas, those are all what we call planned development districts. And so these are essentially special zoning districts that were prepared through a process with the town to address specific needs. And so the best example of that is really for the marketplace. And so when that was pulled together in 1999, that was really designed, what types of regulations do we need to support a new big box development? What types of landscape standards would we have? What's the building design? So all of those things are kind of worked out in detail through a planned development district. Your most recent example, of course, is Coal Creek Crossing, and then you've also got Sagamore and the Guardian Storage Facility, which came in 2010. So in terms of some of your other districts, the kind of brighter yellow here is what we call the low-density residential district. And this allows for single-family dwellings only. You've got a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, and that really includes a lot of original Superior. So it's pretty consistent with what's there in terms of the types of development you have today. There were some additional tools that exist in your code now called the Residential Character Streets District. And this is one, we wanted to mention it because it's very, it was specifically developed at the time to address original Superior, but it's never been used. It really is kind of a 20-year-old tool that's been there but hasn't really been applied. So it's something that specifically addresses original town before the marketplace came online. The medium density residential, sort of these orange areas, these are areas where you have the potential for not just single-family detached homes, but you also have the potential for duplexes, so two-family homes, as well as some smaller multifamily homes. It might be townhomes, that type of thing. And your minimum lot area here is about 6,000 square feet. So most recently, I mentioned you've had some interest in the 2nd Avenue property. That's a pretty large vacant site in original town. And then you've got a couple other sites that are also currently zoned for RM. And then you also have kind of a smattering of pockets of light industrial zoning as well as business commercial. So these are things like the gas station, the CDOT facility. Some of these are, kind of older industrial uses that haven't transitioned, but they're pretty small sites and they're kind of tucked in throughout Northwest Superior. So based on the tools that you have in place, we wanted to talk a little bit about what types of changes you might expect to see. So if we continue to use the tools we have, what might we see over the next 5, 10, 15 years? So when we look at the area as a whole, there's really 4 primary areas where we see the greatest opportunity for change based on what you have in place today. So we want to talk about each of these individually, and then I'll circle back to the area as a whole. And we've got maybe 1, at most 3 questions about each of these areas. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through each one We'll do the question, we'll pause, we'll have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll move on. So that'll keep us going there, but at least you'll have a chance to kind of respond when you're thinking about a particular area if you have thoughts. So as we're going through each of these sites, we're really kind of focused on those 3 questions on the right there. Are the tools we have sufficient to address future changes in Northwest Superior? If not, what types of initiatives, if any, do you think the town should pursue to achieve the community's desired outcomes? In terms of our discussion, we'll want to kind of hear from you what some of the issues are that you really think need to be addressed. If they don't come up in the presentation tonight, we want to hear about those too. We've tried to anticipate some of those, but I think there's a lot of other thoughts out there, and that's really what we're here to talk about. So we'll start with the 76th Street properties. So this area is kind of on the very northwest part of Superior. So this is the CDOT property here. This is US 36. And so Marshall Road kind of comes in this way, and then you're out in the county on this side. So right now, this yellow part has not been annexed into the town. This is about 22 acres, and this is the storage facility that was built in 2010 right here. And this little diagram here is what's in your comprehensive plan now for the site. I mentioned this was one of the opportunity sites that was discussed at that time. So if this property were to be brought into the town, the recommendation now, based on your comp plan, is that you would see a mix of medium density residential and office, potential for some community uses. So, that could be some of those attached dwellings that we talked about under medium density. It could be some small multifamily, could be office. And so any of those things would be kind of supported under your current policy. The comp plan also really emphasizes some of the issues that came out of that process back in 2012. And so there were concerns about, well, if this site develops in the future, we want to make sure we've got some good buffering to the neighborhoods to the south in Sagamore. We want to make sure we've got trail connections to other parts of the area. And so really, this is kind of just a site concept of, if someone comes in, these are the things you should be thinking about. So based on that kind of quick overview, the question is, are you comfortable with that direction for that site? Or do you have other ideas? And this is one of those places where if you do have other ideas, you can write it down, or we'll have a chance to talk about it here in a moment. Can you see if we can turn these lights off so these guys can see the, oh, right there. Okay.
What does number 3 say?
Not sure, no opinion.
Are those supposed to be the same thing?
They could be. So let's talk about this one a little bit. So it sounds like several folks, more than several, but a number of you said no, and you had some other thoughts. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about what their ideas or concerns might be? Yes, sir, in the back.
I noticed you didn't mention any commercial for that area.
Commercial was not mentioned for that area.
What's that? Why?
So I think the thought at the time, and again, this is from the 2012 comp plan, the focus was on maintaining the commercial focus in the marketplace. So that was a fairly large area, and that was really the retail focus of this area. So that was the rationale at the time. Yes?
Could you consider keeping it as open space?
that hadn't come up. Certainly a question we can put on the table. Ma'am, I saw another hand right here. Yes, in the red?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, it seems like an odd place for office, but I would see the possibility of some very small-scale neighborhood, you know, with a place to grab a cup of coffee or, you know, buy a toothbrush kind of thing, rather than having to go all the way or wander, because the big box stores don't serve that.
Okay, so more neighborhood retail type uses. Other observations? Yes.
I'm going to risk overstating the obvious because I think this is on the mind of most of us here. Varying opinion in general for me, it's wonderful to see this growth, and at the same time I think a lot will be concerned about traffic and noise, and at least so far it's probably being considered, but we haven't heard a lot yet about how that's being considered.
So, and keep in mind, this process now is really to focus on what the community wants to know about and whether you think more planning is warranted. So we're not attempting to analyze those issues. We're really trying to get a sense of what those issues are that the community is concerned about, and then make a recommendation to the Planning Commission about maybe what needs to be done to really evaluate those issues further.
Does traffic and noise qualify as potential issues?
If that's an issue that concerns you, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes?
I have been told that a potential usage that was under consideration for 76th Street was senior housing. Is that not true?
I believe that was considered. Where did Stephen go? Stephen's nodding.
Still there. Yeah, we had a council fund meeting over, it was before my time, so it was over 2.5 years ago, about senior housing on that property, and we haven't heard anything since.
Okay.
Darcy, will you just repeat the question for a lot of us back here?
Yeah, so the question was, there was a question whether senior housing had been proposed on that site previously, and it has. It was about 2.5 years ago. Nothing came of that inquiry that was initially brought to the town. So as of this point, there's nothing formally proposed for that site. So.
And the other, just, I think Darcy mentioned it, that property is not in town limits yet, so they'd have to go through an annexation process first, so it's not, nothing's immediate on the property by any stretch.
Is it an option to keep it as is and not annex it?
Is it owned by the county? Who owns that property right now?
It's private.
Okay, it's privately owned.
It would be, you know, whether or not a property owner can ask for annexation.
Yes, ma'am.
Have live workspaces been considered?
It's not specifically addressed in the plan now. We can certainly take note of that. But I think, you know, by virtue of encouraging residential or office, you could certainly make a case that that would be supported based on what you have in place now. But it's just not called out specifically. Any other thoughts on this particular site? Okay. All right, so shifting gears to the marketplace. So I mentioned earlier that this is one of the larger planned development districts in Northwest Superior. That was adopted in 1999 with a retail and a commercial focus. This was designed to be a big box center with supporting retail. That was really the primary intent, and that was put in place about 20 years ago. We talked earlier about the TAP study and the kind of concepts that were being explored there. Based on the existing PD, planned development, you would not be able to introduce residential into that area. So that's not really an option now without some changes to that underlying planned development. So if you didn't pursue changes to that, you would likely to see this area remain primarily commercial retail and lower intensity in its current form. You may see some changes in the actual tenants, maybe some modest changes to smaller pad sites being added, that type of thing, but you're not likely to see radical changes in this area. So beyond that, the changes would need to be initiated by the property owners in coordination with RTD and potentially a development partner if that were the case. So based on kind of where Superior Marketplace stands today and the current regulations for that area, we have two questions for you here. The first is kind of broader, just thinking about how well this area meets the community's needs today. We had a comment earlier about, where do I buy my toothbrush? Neighborhood services. Are you kind of getting what you need from this area currently, or do you think there are changes that are needed? That it's not meeting it well. All right, going once. Okay. So this is pretty consistent with what we've heard in our other meetings so far, is that, generally it's meeting the community's needs, but, there might be some opportunity for improvement. So based on your perceptions, does anyone want to talk about the types of improvements that they might see, or, what came to mind when you answered this question? Yeah.
Restaurants.
More restaurants. Okay. Yes.
The big box stores seem to flourish, but the smaller stores seem to struggle. So it would be something to make it more viable for them to stay there.
Okay. I see 3 hands back, gentlemen back there. We'll start on the right and we'll work our way around. Green shirt first, please.
I would think that there's a lot of blacktop up there that's not being utilized.
So trying to maximize, find some other uses to make use of some of those parking areas. Yes, sir, next to you.
Yeah, it would be nice if it was more walkable, that area. It's, just kind of getting across and not having to walk through a parking lot to do it.
Okay.
I think I support Bob's preliminary evaluation of that, and in reference to that, the fact that there are so many empty spots that that no one wants to rent. So evidently, the community's not being serviced by those empty boxes that are all over that development.
So we had a focus group earlier today with some of the business owners, the property manager, and I think the sense from the folks who actually run those businesses is we need more people, we need more bodies, and the walkability was a big issue for them, and that there needs to be more foot traffic, and that they're just not getting kind of as much traffic as they would like to kind of support those businesses. So some similar things, I think. And yes, ma'am.
I feel that it needs more clustering. I mean,
Okay.
Drive in there, it's just all completely disorganized. If you want to get something to eat, well, I don't know.
So wayfinding again.
I mean, literally, I've been in there several times and done that. So I see clusters, restaurant clusters with little patios, really ambient, environment, night lighting, and, and all of that. But I also would see a creative arts cluster of some type, with galleries and studios, and maybe introduce some kind of an art center that has hands-on art experiences that can be a magnet to draw the community in. And I don't understand, I think I heard you say earlier that housing was not considered for that area, and if you're trying to do transit-oriented like
So that's just to be clear, that's based on what's in place today. So we'll ask about that, but we're just pointing out that you couldn't do that today. The question is, should you be able to in the future? So we'll ask that question in a moment. Yes, ma'am.
So there's this big open store that's adjacent to the Whole Foods. And I was just wondering, is that large enough for, say, a rec center or some kind of community facility like that?
I don't know. Has that ever been?
Sports Authority.
Oh.
Thank you.
About 30,000 square feet.
Yeah.
No, but recreation would be a good, more folks recreation in there. That's an excellent idea.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like more kind of destination activities as well as just uses are potentially of interest. Yes, sir, in the back.
One of the questions that I ask myself is what is it that causes people to drive over to Louisville and park somewhere and then just walk around? And I'm wondering, is there a reason why we can't do that?
Okay, So more walkability.
I
Yes.
think the answer is they have a quaint Main Street in Louisville with how many dozen restaurants there. We don't have that here.
That's what they're building in downtown.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's coming up
We don't have
around.
it yet.
Yeah, it's on its way, but the merging of that, so.
Is there any kind of plan in place to have the town subsidize businesses to go into that area, kind of like Lafayette subsidizes the renovation of the area by giving financial incentives to people?
Has that ever been considered?
No.
Okay.
It could be a location for some incubator environments or co-working spaces. Long Mountain now has just opened a new co-working space, and they already have 20 businesses that are signed up to share that space. And very often that's done with coaches, business coaches and training facilities and things like that. So if you had that, you could bring more businesses into a small area, and then they grow and expand either there or across the road or in Louisville, or wherever they're going to expand. But incubators would be a good location.
Okay.
Actually, now you have such good bus service from Boulder and Denver. You could turn some of that empty space into office space.
So offices, any other thoughts from this end of the crew over here? Okay. Yeah, sorry guys.
Sure. Has anyone estimated how many potential residential units could be supported in there?
The TAP study does some initial concepts, or do they even get into units, Stephen? I can't recall.
Yeah, I don't
It's
recall
more-
either.
it's more of a
I don't know
concept.
that they do an analysis based on what could be supported. We had a representative from RTD here earlier this afternoon, and he didn't have a number, like a magic number for what needs to be there to support RTD either, but it would be somewhere in the range of several hundred probably hopefully less than 1,000, but 400 or 500, and then probably the low end, and then we don't know from there. But.
Well, speaking of RTD, there's never enough parking over there. If you don't go early in the morning, you can't park if you're taking the bus.
For the park and ride?
There's all that empty parking in the shopping center. There's some way to do some of that parking.
Kind of a joint parking arrangement.
To improve the parking.
RTD owns their lot, and so their parking is limited to their lot. Business owners are really careful about owning their parking spaces themselves. So, I mean, that would be a private agreement between.
But you can park at the movie theater. There is additional parking over at the on the movie theater side.
Oh, and you're allowed to park there?
So, okay. So yeah, so if anyone didn't hear that, there is additional parking on the movie theater side, it sounds like, but no formal parking, shared parking agreement in place right now. So let's keep going. So based on this conversation, I think the question is really, we talked a little bit about what tools you have in place and what some of the limitations are, what could happen based on that. Do you think that the town should initiate more detailed planning and potential zoning changes to support a more transit-oriented development pattern at the marketplace? Is that something the town should really initiate?
So this is to promote cycling and walking.
Different types of uses that we've talked about as well. So that could include housing, it could include all of the things that came up in this conversation. Okay, going once. Okay. So pretty strong support for the concept of doing some more detailed planning, but a fair amount said no. Anyone have any other comments, other thoughts that didn't come up in our discussion just a moment ago about this area? Yeah.
I always wondered why they didn't plant any trees out there.
Okay?
Make that parking lot and the whole area a lot more inviting.
Okay. Any other last thoughts on this area we haven't covered? Okay, let's keep moving then. So the next area is Original Town. We talked a little bit about the existing zoning in this area. And based on kind of what's out there today, Stephen did some kind of quick analysis on how many vacant lots do we actually have in Original Town. And we were a little surprised to hear, so there were about 350 lots platted initially, and about 110 of those are built upon. You guys are probably well aware there's a number of places where some homes have kind of multiple lots that they've, so it's one lot that is constituted of, it's made up of several original lots that were platted. So there's kind of some different configurations in there. But bottom line is there's a fair amount of vacant lots in that area, and based on that, kind of what you're seeing happening around Superior, I think the sense is that you are likely to see interest in infill and redevelopment in that area in the near future. So based on that, what could happen, you might see some larger single-family homes, and ultimately that is going to increase the density of that area. So adding any homes to that area is going to increase the density, but I think it's going to be based on how quickly that happens and where it happens, but that's a fair assumption to think about when you think about the future. In the RM area, so the orange areas on the map, that's where you're likely to see, based on your current zoning, duplex, maybe some smaller townhome kind of multifamily in those areas. You do have the potential for that based on current regulations today. You may also see some of those industrial areas change to residential. If you've got a small little industrial site buried in the middle of a neighborhood, it's a good chance someone's going to come in and say this probably makes more sense for residential someday. So those types of changes might be things that you would see as well. Based on your current zoning, you've got fairly flexible regulations, basic height, setbacks, those types of things. It does not currently allow you to do accessory dwelling units, and someone said earlier, what the heck's an accessory dwelling? So this is basically one of those small units above the garage or adjacent to the garage that you might see in other communities. Louisville has quite a few in and around their kind of downtown area where people may have a small unit for a family member or that they rent out. But they're generally a lot smaller. So that type of pattern is not permitted today. Some people like those, some people don't like those. We're just making the point that you really don't have that option today. Question?
Is there a height regulation in Original Town?
There is, and 32 feet is the current
What
max.
was the question?
What is the height regulation currently in Original Town? And it's 32 feet for a single family. Yes?
Can you tell us again what H is?
H?
Way up in the corner.
Blue areas.
Oh, that's the IL. That's the industrial, light industrial.
Oh.
Okay, yes.
Is there affordable housing that's slated for Original Town?
Not that I'm aware of. Is nothing that's been proposed, no. No. All right, so.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
Within the circle,
Mhm.
there is a spot along the creek that is designated. It looks like kind of a rectangle and then just a right turn on it.
It's in.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea. Up higher.
The way.
Right there.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, I'm curious what
It's in
that
the
might
county, is that?
Yeah, it's in the county, it's a little enclave that's not been incorporated in.
Oh, okay.
Are there still plans to expand this building into a larger town, government facility? That was like
A year ago?
discussed
Discussed
previously,
and
right?
Sits more or less shelved.
Okay.
Yes.
So the potential exists in the RL area. Am I reading this to be that in Original Town, there could be larger single-family homes?
So here's how, what does that mean? Sure, so a lot of the original miners' cottages are, 800 square feet or smaller. Some of those have been added onto, a lot of them have been added onto over the years. But what would, if someone were to build a new home today, it's typically going to be much larger than what you would have built back then. And so the, relative size compared to what's there today could be larger. So, a lot of the newer homes are 2,500 square feet or more. So depending on whether that was 1-story or 2-story, that, relative to what's next door, it could feel larger. And I think the other factor there is that, the lot coverage is higher than what is currently covered in a lot of those cases. I think it's 50% in that area, isn't it, Stephen? 40? 40? Okay. Okay. So that's basically just kind of thinking that relative to what's there, they're probably going to be larger than what's there based on your current regulations. So.
But is there a restriction on how large they can be?
So the height's going to restrict that, as well as your setbacks. So all of those things together are going to define how big it is. Yeah. So, all right. So we've got a few questions about Original Town. So let's start. But just kind of before we get into that, you guys will be very familiar with these, but just, kind of the key characteristics of Original Town for those who aren't as familiar with it. You've got alleys in a lot of cases. You've got the gridded streets that you don't have in other parts of Superior. Mostly single-family homes, and you've got a mix of ages and styles. A lot of original miners' cottages, but also some newer homes as well. So the first question is whether the town should explore potential changes to existing zoning or design standards to protect the character of original town. And what that means is going to be different to different people, but I think just a general concept now, this idea is something that you would think is a good idea, you're happy with the tools that are in place now, or you're not sure, but you kind of want to explore it. So any comments or observations about this? Okay, we'll go to the next one and then we can kind of circle back on the discussion. I think that will help. So the question here is, if you think yes, what is it that you would want to see looked at more closely? Is it the size of homes? Is it the types of houses, whether it's single family or multifamily? Overall density, circulation, access, so basically traffic and pedestrian connections, all of the above. All right, yes.
Are these answers correlated to whether you live in that area or not?
We can sort them that way, yes.
Oh, okay.
And
I was curious as
yep.
to how those answers related to that.
So I think, has everyone had a chance? I think given the split, we're probably about there. So everybody had a chance? Okay. Okay. All right. All of the above. So anyone else want to talk a little bit about kind of why they voted the way they did, or have specific thoughts they want to share with the group? Talk about. Stony silence.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
When I moved to Superior in '86, we had different code book, different zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was changed prior to the Superior Marketplace going in. So this town, as it sat, even before Rock Creek, was not self-sufficient. It was just a bunch of houses. And prior to that, when the mine was around, if you look at the old maps, there were bars, there were restaurants, there were all types of commercial establishments that don't exist right now in the original town.
Don't forget the pool hall.
And pool hall and post office. There were a lot of amenities that we don't have right now. And if you look at towns like Erie, Lafayette, Louisville, those towns, they survive because of the part of that town that has that mystique to it where people want to come, and as she said, they want to come and they want to go to art shops and they want to go to mom and pop restaurants, and they don't want to go to big boxes, and they don't want to go to these big things that you're building over here necessarily. They just want to like walk down the neighborhood and have a hamburger. And you really can't do that the way the zoning exists today. The way the zoning was in '86, you could have done some of those things. You just would have to go to the variance committee and talk your way through that. So I think that when the zoning got changed, that kind of did the town a disservice. Now with the original town of Superior, with the property values being assessed very high in regards to the year of the dwelling, it doesn't seem like it's fair to some of the residents that I've talked to out there that their house is being compared to a house that's sold down the street at $700,000 or $800,000, and they've had this house since the 70s, and all of a sudden they're paying a huge amount of property taxes in reference to their property being indexed by the properties that are being sold at higher value. And so I think that in regard to that, that maybe you should throw Old Town Superior a carrot and rezone that entire area, neighborhood mixed use, and allow the people to do what they want in that area. And maybe they could bring in some art shops, and maybe they could bring in some things that we don't have that Louisville, Lafayette, and Erie has. I think that that the way the board is adjusted, and this wasn't when Bob was on board, this was later, that it's been geared more towards Rock Creek and that type of environment, that so the old town is really not being put in the right perspective anymore.
What are some other thoughts on that suggestion and the positioning of this area generally? Any other thoughts?
Well,
Yes, sir.
I live in Rock Creek, and I'd love to have a place, if I want to go, to a cool place to have dinner or something, I go to Louisville and I go to Boulder, and it'd be nice to have something like that around here. Yeah.
And we had talked about this before before they narrowed Coal Creek. They had talked about putting in 2-story business residence buildings in there, and then depending on who's on board, then things kind of sway in the wind, and it gets changed a lot.
So was that area initially kind of closer to the marketplace that you're talking about that changed then?
Well, actually, where the marketplace was, those were houses, and those people were blighted out to build the marketplace. I don't want to get into that kind of conversation. Because you won't like the answers I give to that.
So, other perspectives? Anyone wants to share? Yes, sir, in the back.
Well, as somebody mentioned earlier, one of our biggest concerns in the original town where I live in Coal Creek is traffic cutting through there to get to the big house. And so, I'm not sure that it would be appropriate to have businesses that would draw a lot of traffic, like a restaurant.
Okay.
In original town, but I could very well see a redevelopment of the strip mall part of the marketplace with something like a walking mall, businesses that face each other with some landscaping streets overhead.
Okay, so more support for kind of next to original town.
Get there on Marshall Road, cutting through original Superior, and we could walk over there.
Okay. I see some hands coming up on this side, and I'll come back to you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think about how Coal Creek, we just moved here like 2.5 years ago, and Coal Creek was already what it was at that point with the road and the sidewalk, and you could clearly see that that was like the favorite road of original town, you know? And how the rest of the town is, you know, we're on a grid system, it is walkable, there aren't really any actual sidewalks though, so that's not terribly safe. There's also not a lot of off-street parking, most of these homes didn't have garages, and so unless you built something else, you know, I think the idea of adding the capability of doing accessory dwelling units would help to utilize a larger portion of these lots that have these smaller homes on them, but would also allow for more people to come in, to have some more affordable housing, to have some income as well. Yeah, I mean, I also think about, like, I would love it if people would come here and walk around and go to restaurants or go to an art gallery, but I also don't really want them to park here. You know, they can park where all that concrete is over there and then walk over. You know, and maybe it is. Maybe it's just making a more realistic access for people to walk or bike. You know, I cross Marshall every day to go to RTV, and it's scary as hell. You know, people are flying to go to Target, and that's fine. I get that, but also, like, I live here, so yeah.
So you wouldn't be opposed to Rogers Farm being a big parking lot?
No, I don't want any more parking lots. I don't think we need more cars. I would like it to make it less car friendly, actually, personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to go. I'll come back to you guys here in a second.
So when you look at that line with respect to future residential development, like on the corner of 2nd and close to the trailhead, they had the 3 mobile homes in there that they tore out. There's some empty lots in there. What's the process with the town to get approval for those? And are there any, I mean, obviously you said size, setback, lot, occupancy, but is there anything else in terms of, you know, appropriateness to the theme of original town? Or I'm assuming that's not in place. So when someone comes into those 150 lots that have potential, what's it going to look like? How's it going to feel? And what's the process?
So it depends. If it's a use by right to develop, depending on the zoning. The Rogers Farm is developed for a zoned medium density. Some of the other properties I think you might be referencing as far as structures being removed or zoned low density. But what this kind of exercise is letting everyone know is that we have zoning parameters that tell you your setbacks, but you have a use by right permanent bill. That would just go to a building permit. It would be a review, kind of a cursory review by myself, planning department, to see that it meets setbacks, meets site requirements and stuff like that, but it doesn't go through a planning process. So if somebody were to, real quick, if somebody were to come into Rogers Farm and ask for a plan development, that would go from like, and that's kind of what that concept plan was that we saw in March, and then we also saw another version of it last December. If they came through a plan development process, it would come through planning commission and go to the town board, and we would have architectural regulations and all that.
But on those single family lots,
But on the single family lots,
where
that's
there's
fine.
potential, if you're within those
The
rather
parameters that are in
loose
place.
parameters, zoning parameters, you could build whatever.
You could build within those parameters.
Okay.
So we had a couple more here. Yes, here, and I'll go to the.
I just wanted to say, regarding walkability, right now it is really difficult to get from original town to what's being developed as downtown Superior. And from a walkability point of view, I think it's really important that there are sidewalks and that it's easy to get across McCaslin to downtown Superior safely. Because it's I don't even know if the street lights are set up so that you can easily walk across.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, behind.
As a long-time resident of the town of Superior, we don't want sidewalks in South Edition of the town of Superior. It will take away from our quaintness.
Okay.
I just want to say, well, I think one of the attractions of the Northwest area is that you can walk to the big box stores, you can walk to them, you can walk to trails, there are bike trails that are very easy access. But it's really a good area to move traffic through. I mean, moving traffic up and down, and if you compare how traffic moves on the Caslin to how traffic moves on 28th Street in Boulder, I mean, it's night and day, and I prefer it to stay the way it is rather than go the way of 28th Street. So, I mean, I don't think those big parking lots are very aesthetic, but you can get a hell of a lot of cars in and out of them very easily, and you don't have people driving around looking for places to park on streets. I mean, in an environment where everybody is driving, it's actually a pretty efficient way of moving people around. I think it could be made more attractive. I'd like it to be made. I think some good ideas have come up, but I would be against anything which reduced car traffic circulation in favor of pedestrians or bicycles, because there's far more people using cars than walking or cycling.
Well, and I think the plans that you have in place really try to balance those two objectives. And, you know, part of that is creating those connections that you talked about, so that you can move people and cars more efficiently through and, you know, kind of to the places they want to go. So that's really kind of, you know, the direction that your plans talk about.
Everybody wants to go in that direction, but nobody seems to be able to make it work. There's Amsterdam and Stockholm and a couple of cities that have basically been built around traffic, built around bicycles. But Boulder's been trying to do this for years, and I don't think that situation has been getting any better. I think it's getting worse.
Sure. Yeah.
Just to follow up on what Phyllis was saying, are there any underpasses or additional tunnels that are planned under McCaslin outside of the one that's right here?
None planned, but that one will be kind of enhanced on the other side of the street when Parks 1 and 2 application gets built. So we have a final development plan in place for Parks along the creek on the east side of the castle. So I mean, once you arrive over there, it's going to be a lot more inviting, and then you'll have more connections to get to different places in the town through that improvement. But that's the one underpass that's planned right now.
I'm sorry, did you say one additional?
No,
just the one.
Just
enhancements to that.
Okay, got it.
So it would be nice if the trail, the single tree trail, continued over to that tunnel, as opposed to, you know, there's that sort of trail with the broken up asphalt and then down McCaslin, which is kind of a mess. So if somehow you were able to get, say, on a bicycle from the single tree trail over to here, right, you know, and then underneath would be nice.
Okay. So we're running short on time. I'm going to keep us moving. I'm going to take one more question here.
Just one comment. I would just wonder, or maybe it's a question, if they could put lights in that underpass. It's one of the few underpasses that has no lights.
Good point. So, okay, I'm going to keep us rolling here. We've just got a few more questions. So last area specifically to talk about is the 2nd Avenue property. So this is formerly known as Rogers Farm, which many of you may know that as. This was the second opportunity area site that the comp plan looked at. Preferred uses and current zoning for the site are for medium density residential and office. We've talked about there have been a variety of concepts that have been explored for this site recently, so definitely some interest in this property. Site design considerations were really to kind of, you know, getting back to that kind of circulation question. The thought at the time was continuation of the original town grid, you know, to keep that character, provide the pedestrian connections over to downtown Superior across McCaslin, so really focused on those connections. So that's what the plan says today. That's really the foundation for any review of projects that come forward at this point. Question is, are you comfortable with that current direction?
Can you go back to something I missed up there? Sorry.
You know what, I'm going to, okay.
What was that?
Here, actually, the third part was about the connections. Clear bullets. Here, hold on one second, we'll get you caught up. Yeah, thanks. And this is a case, if you have specific reactions in terms of why you don't think these are good policy directions, please do write those down, or we can talk about them briefly here in a moment.
Is that another way of just saying mixed use? in parentheses? Is that what you mean?
No, actually, it's not really intended to, I mean, they're adjacent uses, but it's not necessarily going to be a vertically mixed use or anything like that, if that's what you're asking. It would be medium density residential adjacent to office.
Okay.
All right, a couple more seconds. Going once. Okay. So generally, yes, but a fair amount of folks who have some other thoughts. Anyone who said no, want to talk a little bit about that? Yes, sir.
What is the traffic plan for getting there? Are they going to dump all of that onto Second Avenue?
So the connection right now would connect to the roundabout so that you have flow through the area. That's what the initial concept was of the transportation.
Is that roundabout going to connect to Douglas Street at that point?
Do you know that?
We don't know at this point. I mean, there's a connection plan. The concept
Even if we
plan.
can't hear you back here.
There's a connection plan, obviously, off of McCaslin to get into original town, and how that happens kind of depends on the development. So the concept plans that we've seen so far for that site, there was some community engagement by the developer that owns that property, and there were plans that showed connection just to like a commercial piece. There were plans that showed a more indirect access that didn't give you straight through to kind of calm traffic and deter it from being, more of a cut through. And then there were, like an option for it to actually come straight through and actually be tie into the grid system. And it kind of depends on how it develops. If it develops as a planned development, then I think we have more latitude to control that. If it develops as a use by right, then it's probably more likely to develop as part of the grid pattern that already exists.
I'd hate to see that much traffic added to Second Avenue. It's not really sufficient to handle that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
What does medium density actually mean?
So that could mean duplexes, so 2 attached units. It could mean some small townhome units, so maybe 3 or 4 units that are attached. The concepts that were proposed included both single family, kind of along the original town side, and that transitioned into some townhomes, I believe, and then some office. And so
how many dwellings would you be talking about altogether?
it depends on the actual layout, and Stephen said, depending on whether someone comes in as a use by right or through a PD, but the range was, in the 50 to 70 range, depending on how that site was kind of laid out, at least in terms of the concepts that have been explored so far.
It's not another 1,400 or whatever they're putting over in
It's depending on your perspective, it's a relatively modest number. So.
And it would have the same height restrictions that we talked about earlier?
So is RM the same 32 feet? Yeah. So I saw a new hand somewhere in here I wanted to get to. Yes, sir, in the green shirt, and then I'll come back to you, sir.
Well, from the meetings I've been to about that property, it was originally platted back in 1950-something for like less than 50 homes, single-family residential, which ties into existing Superior. Big push is for medium density, office space. It doesn't fit in Old Town as far as I'm concerned.
So you think single family probably makes more sense there, if anything?
It does to me.
Okay. Yes, sir, I haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the entire plan is all about different bolt-ons. Like, it doesn't seem like a comprehensive plan. Like, that term doesn't seem like anything's unified. It seems like all these bolt-on projects. And so I'm curious to know, like, what is the vision of this town as a whole, not in these individual products that, or projects that fuel the needs of developers, right? Like, I've never been to a dinner party in the however many years we've lived here, which is like 15, 16, and no one's ever said, I want more big box stores. No one's ever said, hey, I want more development with, medium density homes. Like that, people aren't talking about that. So I guess my comment is there just seems to be no overall vision for the entire town of Old Town Superior. And I too worry about the traffic on Second Avenue, just on Second. Or I'm sorry, Coal Creek becoming a.
So I'm going to answer. I think your point is a good setup for our next question. So I'm going to take one more question in the back, sir, and then we're going to move on.
Well, I have a comment. A question. I think the list you showed us of the potential policy directions had several things that were in conflict with each other.
How so?
Well, a grid versus a PUD, for instance. Can you look back to that list real quick?
We can. So the continuation of the grid, I think, was really kind of aimed at keeping that smaller scale character, the traditional character of the area. The street connection to McCaslin was so that those folks had a way out, without having to go through original town. So.
They don't like.
So
Okay.
I just reiterate that those site design considerations, those are things that we have more flexibility and more ability to control through a plan development right now than we do through a use by right.
But what impact to the residents?
So the first bullet, the first land uses for this area are mixed, medium density residential and office. As the other gentleman said, that I don't think the medium density and the office fit in with the original town.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So let's keep moving.
I guess you're just going to ignore my hand. Is that what's going to happen? Because I had it up first, but you just don't want
Excuse me,
to
we've got a lot of people in the room. I think you've had plenty of options, and I'm happy to hear what you have to say. I wasn't trying to ignore you.
I was at the last meeting about Rogers Farm, and there was no consensus about what was going on. Nobody wanted 74 houses in there, townhouses, or the other stuff you're talking about. Nobody wanted access to Second Avenue, and no one thought that the roundabout would handle the traffic. So I'm confused as to even why you're bringing that up as like it's a done deal when it wasn't a done deal at that meeting.
So it's not a done deal at all.
Okay.
We're having this conversation because the question is, does this direction still make sense?
Stevens, is your name Steven?
My name is Steven.
Okay, Steven said that they're examining different types of PUDs when that property was originally agricultural, and the way it was plotted, as Bob said, does not allow for 74 houses. Now, people have talked about parking and traffic, and what you're doing here is you're going to like filter a whole bunch of traffic through original town Superior. And that's basically what that property's doing.
So we're here to ask the question of whether that direction makes sense. I think what we're hearing loud and clear is there's a lot of concerns about the current direction in your plan. That's why we're here having this conversation. We've heard concerns about traffic, we've heard concerns about the types of uses, and we hear you. That's why we're here. So there is the reason why we're presenting what's in your current plan now is just to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of understanding the direction that was adopted by the town back in 2012. Superior is a different place 5 years later. There's things that have changed, and so that's why we're having this conversation. So we absolutely are here to listen to what your concerns are, and it's not meant to be presented as anything's a done deal at this point. So I'm sorry if you took it that way.
Thank you for your comments.
We're not here to advance any development. I'm just clarifying what the concept plans were that have come through.
Yeah, and I've seen a bunch of them, and I've been to a bunch of meetings, and I never saw a final yet. I never saw anything that was voted on and approved.
It is not. You're exactly right.
It hasn't been.
Okay. We just want everyone to be aware of what has been speculated and what's the kind of the potential.
I did.
So that's why we're kind of clarifying.
Okay, so this is our kind of wrap up couple of slides here. Really getting at some of the concerns that some of you have raised is that based on what's happening, kind of what the tools you have in place today, you really are going to be reacting to different opportunities as they pop up. There is not a specific vision for Northwest Superior. The comprehensive plan talks about the community as a whole. So we've talked about some of the individual directions that the comp plan has, but based on kind of what we have in place today, you're likely to see a little bit more of this case-by-case consideration of projects as they come forward. So the question we're really trying to get at today is whether you think a broader discussion about a vision and specific changes in this area needs to be had. We've certainly scratched the surface here tonight in terms of some of the priorities and concerns that you may have and other opportunities that you see. But the question is, do you think the town should really be actively engaging the community in a conversation about this beyond these meetings? All right, going once. Okay. Big shock, yes. We do have a follow-up question, though. I think we've talked about some of the specific areas of Northwest Superior, kind of some of the different questions there. The question for you guys is, do you think any of those areas are more pressing in terms of how the town might look at those, the types of changes that are needed? What are your priorities for this area? Or do you think you really need to step back and look at the area as a whole and come back to that question?
Well, people are voting. Could I make one more quick comment?
Sure.
I moved here in 1975 when Superior was just 90 houses down by the creek. And so obviously I've seen a lot of changes. And I just want to point out that original town, and especially even more so the part of original town south of the creek, next to the Rogers Farm property, has always been a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. And I would hate to see that area inundated by traffic from Rogers Farm. And I don't like the inundation that we're getting on the north side of the creek now from people cutting through and even speeding up Coal Creek Drive and sometimes just touring around the old part of town.
We have massive traffic south of the creek with the trailhead.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Point taken. Has everybody had a chance? It looks like not everybody weighed in. Anybody else want to weigh in before we move on? Okay. All right.
Excuse me, Carson.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
The only comment I'd like to make is that, for the most part, I've seen kind of a lack of any discussion about any tie-in between Northwest Superior and Town Center.
Okay. That was the area, I did mention that in the transportation plan, a lot of those ideas about connections, and that's really where the current plans address that. We haven't talked a lot about it tonight, but definitely an important consideration. We got another hand in the back.
Yeah, I would say a lot of these questions are impossible to answer not knowing how to cross the street.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's wonderful, then things over here are different, but everything's empty over there as well.
So you mean kind of how quickly that fills up and builds out?
How people use it out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And really, this is just a planning exercise.
Yeah.
So
no, I understand.
I mean, it's not a forecast. It's really, I guess, another way to look at it is there's a lot of development push in town right now, and part of that is driven by what's going on across the street. So, are our plans in place? I don't know that anyone expected the amount of growth or the amount of applications that are kind of coming in, and whether or not we need to take another look at it. That's really the question for today.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the comprehensive plan that was last updated in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, a lot has changed in the last 5 years. What triggers an update to the comprehensive plan? Is that by charter, or I mean, when is it time to update it, since there's a lot of pressure here?
Question was, the comp plan was last updated about 5 years ago. What's typically the trigger for that? And, most comprehensive plans, every 10 years or so, they need to be looked at. It's really driven by how much is happening and, kind of what the town's priorities are. So some don't get updated for longer than that. It really just depends on kind of.
So would that come from the board, the town board? Would they decide, or is it the staff?
Planning commission, board, typically.
It could come from recommendation from staff, the planning commission, but
can it come from me?
Probably more likely the town board. And then you look at it like, we're looking at this area, we're not looking at Coal Creek Crossing specifically, when I'm looking at Sagamore, those are newer developments. If you look at the town as a whole, you know, I think that planning commission looked at kind of everything in their determination to look at Northwest Superior individually and found that this was an area that, you know, needed the attention sooner. So, I mean, we certainly could look at a full comprehensive plan and then kind of take the scope of, you know, how much is Rock Creek changing, how many, you know, how many more of those opportunity areas need another look. We have 12 identified in town. Some of them have already been developed. One of them is downtown Superior. So there's a plan in place for downtown Superior. But whether or not you need a holistic look at the comprehensive plan is, this is a chunk of that, but it's not the whole thing.
Yes.
Regarding the comment that so much of this depends on what happens in downtown Superior, when are we actually going to see some stores and shops in there?
It's a process. I mean,
it's like a year, 2 years.
We don't have any. I mean, I have 3 residential development applications currently under review for that area. Nothing new commercial-wise yet, but I think the developer, I mean, the expectation is to put some rooftops in that area before the rest of those developments occur. And the other thing that he said repeatedly is that they're very careful about what they want in there. I mean, you can go put, you know, probably some commercial in there, but they're trying to get a mix of uses in there that is right for the vision that they have for that area. So that's part of the time process as well.
Yeah. So I know we've talked about infrastructure in terms of traffic and roads. When you look at these potential new developments, like, has there been given consideration to like water and other, you know, police capacity, or I know we don't have our own town police department, but other kinds of infrastructure, because that wasn't discussed. Is that?
So the comprehensive plan actually addresses kind of the whole gamut of things. So that's definitely something that gets considered when larger projects come in. I don't know if there's a specific process other than kind of touching base with all of the service providers that you guys go through, Stephen, or?
We are our own water and sewer provider. We build that capacity. Capacity for you know, gas and electric is right hand. Bring it to you.
So I saw a couple other hands. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I think that this comprehensive plan that we're talking about, for the amount of properties left to build on in Original and Old Town Superior here, we're sure going to spend a lot of money for the little tiny bit we got left to build on. I mean, we should leave Bowen alone, and we sold our soul when we voted to put them over the hill, boys. So we just want left alone, and I'll bet you that over 50% of the people in this room are from Rock Creek, which that's great. But that would be like us going to Boulder to let them vote on a tax for Superior to pay. Hell yeah, it's going to pass. It'll cost them nothing.
So other thoughts?
I really like the idea of having a comprehensive plan, because I'd rather have a coherent strategy than just do everything as tactical pieces. So that, I mean, there's some character to the area. I really like the area. I've been very happy since we moved here. I like the regional town. I like the new developments. I think there are been lots of suggestions for improving it, but they'll work better if they're a coherent strategy rather than just a lot of individual tactics.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's 8:10. We said we'd wrap up at 8, so I'm going to close really quickly with kind of a homework assignment. We gave you each one of these comment forms. There's some other questions just if you want to be thinking about. These 3 meetings we've had are really kind of just to kind of get as many folks involved as we can, but we're going to have the online survey available tomorrow. So if there are other folks, neighbors, other people you know who are interested in these issues, who have an opinion that you want to make sure they get in, we will have that up on the town's website. If you're signed up for the town's mailing list, we'll make sure we get an e-blast out so you can kind of click on that link and weigh in on some other questions about what you'd like to see or not in Northwest Superior. In terms of next steps beyond that, we'll have the comment form, the questionnaire up until November 9th. So you've got 2 full weeks for that. We'll take all of the feedback that we've heard over the last couple of days and then online. We'll synthesize that, we'll present it to the Planning Commission and lay out some options in terms of, based on what we've heard, here are some different ways that you might consider to proceed and try to frame up that conversation. So the Planning Commission will deliberate on that and then ultimately help us craft a recommendation to take to the town board in January. So with that, I will stop and thank you all so much for your participation. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I think just dropping by the door, right? No problem. Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Good job. I wasn't reading Subarea. Yeah, I know. I thought it was a new term.
Right now, we're in pretty good shape. The town manager we had before, the reason we lost this month, because as the town will not allow that. Parties we've been here, they wouldn't want to see us going out there. Come up to us, they'll know that you're black, so we're over there. So RB said, we step ourselves. It's not just arguing.
Just south.
You're hear this? This guy. That's like if you go north of the That's great.
Nightmare. I hate that roundabout. I'm a biker, so it's kind of like it's really dangerous.
Somebody moved out of your house and you don't have, you're scrambling. That's why we have our public works guys. Cost us very much, we're paying. I guess I know too much because I do with this. I mean, I'm around here. I'm 3 kids, a mile west of original town. If you live up there, I can play.
There's nobody more frustrated.
Unless you live on the cul-de-sac there, what do you do? Complain and then I don't.
Is that right? And I'm one of them, so.
Is that right?
I just wanted to say, thank you for a good job. I'm saying last night. I appreciate the approach.
I think traffic is.
That roundabout is a nightmare.
There's all these cars coming in.
Dangerous. It's like anyway. I cycle up there, you know, it's kind of like.
It's not good.
I don't feel bad.
But it's going to get better.
We never pull the roads around here.
This range camera tells us it's going to get better.
I need to know before I keep, there's so much, I can't push snow. I do want to get this snow. So if you can't push the snow, you're going to go in trucks on the road. I mean, I've seen it. Because I'm still
So it's.
Main Street.
Yeah, we know. We feel your pain.
Still there.
We continue to work.
I remember pavement. And police are right on by.
Yeah. They should hire. I think they did a better job. Well, there's not any parking over there yet, but that's going to be better.
He knows a lot of problems.
It's not good. We appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, guys. He needs a honeybee to bring a gallon of vinegar.
George.
Yeah.
My kids are in school. That's your boy? How old is he? Like about 27? Okay, so he's Brian's son.
He went fireside.
Oh, he was at fireside.
Come up, sis. Yeah. You come see me. I'm there every day.
I'll wait back there.
Yeah. All right.
Always someone like that. Thank you guys.
Volunteer in the classroom.
Yeah.
Because our son's very
You remember the schools? We had a.
Yeah, we kind of backed ourselves in.
It's a big green building up there. The big green building, you just sit right here. And then there was a school. Superior's Big street. When I was little, when I was
The Miners Cottage, yeah, with the bigger signs, the little porch and everything.
But I have a tough time with these kids because they're not nice. It's just one. That's the hard part of the logistics, right? When you tell me you can't park in Valley Cross because you can't park here, that's our golden goose. Because, I mean, don't bring your neck.
Boy, I worry about that. Because I realize that millions of dollars.
I worry about school.
The best part is over there, they get to keep half the tax money to this day. That's how come we keep our areas. You look hard now, you gotta dig deep.
Wait, say that again?
They get it.
So meaning, reduce their taxes by 50%.
They cut the whole 9%, they keep 4.5%. So it's like 100%.
It's like, it's that, well, it's like what Amazon wanted for their new second headquarters. The tax breaks are over $1 billion.
Who's gonna put the most frosting on the cake?
But look at how values are, look at how rich customers are, how much money they're generating. I had no idea about this. That's because it's a successful corporation. Really anything.
Thanks, hey. We do have a few unruly residents.
That's fine.
I kept mine till last.
Yeah, we save them. Appreciate all the comments.
I don't.
You don't. You know me too good. So if you guys see me out on the street, stop. Say hi up there. I'll come by your house.
Whether you want to or not.
That's a good question.
He's got to start something.
Huge windows like that. It's scary. I have something. Pretty cool. It's easy
Yeah, we asked a question.
I'm curious to see what's the percentage difference.
What, like a Cooper conversion?
Yeah, last night we had a fair amount of
How did they get a vote? They were over there, you get over that.
How many people realize that?
No, that was just you and I.
We don't tell you that. He was an access part.
Yesterday was just right.
We've been trying to look at
Somebody I didn't know.
About that, he was trying to buy this. It's got 200 acres, and that's his part. What are you going to
Your next place.
I've never kids, you know what
who are basically going crazy, going like towards the hotel, and then wrapping around. Yeah, those would be the two. We have
I ran into so many people that Costco. Oh my God. Friday night at 6 o'clock.
How's everything going with you guys? Good. Yeah, it's
We've done all break things together, but let's be honest, it's Costco. It's Costco.
They're showing up to your daughter gets a job.
What job is that? I mean, what kind of job?
You should be at work.
I should have been like, it's tax generated.
Makes me want to go shop at Costco and sit and talk about numbers. You know how much and then see it. I just heard about that. I'll check it out. Make sure that. All right, well, I think this is a really you did a great job.
You got stuff like that,
We got ready to done.
Yeah, it didn't, it was one of those things.
I gotta go relieve my babysitter.
Yeah. It was just like, okay, now I'm gonna catch everybody up again, and then, okay, now what's happened in the last 5 years? That took a little bit.
At least this is what I do for work. Actually, my team does it. I watch them. I can't stay down and watch it.
Yeah. Great, like,
I know you have
use children. I'm like, it sounds, I said that, but it sounds better when it comes from somebody else. It's so fun.
Hey, Mark, I like it in the budget, lightweight tables.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? These are lighter, then you've got new ones. Actually, they're not as heavy as the ones we have. Run.
These are great.
Yeah, they're really good.
I mean, they look very nice.
They do.
Practicality is better than, probably no, you put it over there. Where?
Mark, how are you doing? This is what I do all day. Okay. For my team, I watch them. Was this televised or no?
Not televised, recorded. The last one was, this is the only one. They go in this conference room on the other side. I can go over that. Yeah, thank you.
We need to put up on these chairs.
We'll fix it tomorrow. There's nothing in the morning, is there, Mark?
Tomorrow I don't think so.
Where the hell is this?
We'll just leave them.
I'll put them in Rose.
Darcy, you have everything from under here?
Yes.